The Halloween franchise is a mixed bag, let's be real here. But its influence on the slasher subgenre and horror in general is undeniably huge. It's also the franchise that serves as my gateway to slasher and horror films. Since it's Halloween, might as well talk about the Halloween franchise, and ranking the movies from worst to best. In last place, Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers. I don't even know how to explain this movie other than it's just pure garbage. There's absolutely nothing memorable here besides the worst aspects of this film. It retconned Part 4's ending, which is one of my favorite endings of this franchise. Then they just take everything back to basics and wasted a good concept. The characters were unlikable and just borderline annoying. The kills were unmemorable and dull. The mask looked way worse when you compare it to the previous movie's mask, and Part 4 doesn't even have that good of a mask, so it's mind-boggling how much they ruined it even more. So yeah, in my opinion, this is the worst movie of this franchise. In 12th place, Halloween Resurrection. Now both Part 5 and this movie have similar issues. They retconned endings of previous movies and change everything for the worse. The first 20 minutes, horrendous. The final 20 minutes, laughable in all the wrong ways. It's got that early 2000s aesthetic, but it just doesn't work for Halloween in my opinion. The characters were inferior when compared them to H2O's cast, and all of them, except for the forgettable final girl, were all one-dimensional horny-ass teens, and you kinda root for them to die, which is a feeling that I hate when I watch a horror movie. The reason that it's not in last place is because it's at least kinda enjoyable than Part 5, but still, these two were the lowest lows of this franchise. In 11th place, Halloween 6: The Curse of Michael Myers. For reference, I watched the producer's cut of this film, and there's things that I kinda liked about it. The atmosphere looked really good, and there were tons of shots that looked wonderful, and it's got the Halloween aesthetic right. The mask was also improved and doesn't look as horrendous as Part 5's, and this was the final performance of Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis. And it wasn't as good as the original or Part 4, but at least it's not as badly over the top as Part 5. However, this movie still stinks. Michael Myers was Jamie's incest uncle, and it's just terrible. What were the writers thinking with that premise? I don't know. The Cult of Thorn was expanded upon, and they were boring. They were also the worst part of this film. Michael works best when he's motiveless evil, not because he's part of a cult and some rituals and bullshit. It's just bad. It's just questionable. So yeah, the plot was nonsensical, and besides the decent performances and kills, there's nothing else here to enjoy. Not unless it's one of your guilty pleasures. In 10th place, Rob Zombie's Halloween. Rob Zombie's Halloween movies are divisive in the fandom. Some appreciate the style and vision that he brought on the table, while others loathe his interpretation of Michael Myers and the lore surrounding him. I honestly don't mind both of these movies that much, but if I'm asked which of the two I dislike more, it's the first one. On the positive side, I do think that there's something interesting here with what Rob Zombie was trying to accomplish, by giving Michael humanity and an origin story. It's one that I personally not a fan of, but one that I respected. This movie also had some of the most gnarliest and visceral kills within this franchise, and the physical performance by Tyler Mane as Michael was good enough, and it fitted well with what Rob Zombie was trying to accomplish. But while I respected the vision here, personally I would rather rewatch the original than this movie. The first half was fine with the origins of Michael, it was interesting enough, but it's totally hard to get through, especially if you don't like Rob Zombie's style of writing characters and dialogue. And then there's the latter half of the film, which is basically a quicker and meaner remake of the original. So again, totally respect what Rob Zombie was going for, but there's already a better version of this story in the original. In 9th place, Halloween Kills, the second film of the David Gordon Green trilogy and the weakest in my opinion. I know that for some people, Ends is a far more inferior film than Kills, but for some reason, this movie just didn't do it for me. I like the opening of this movie, it totally captured the vibe of the original, but besides that, I don't like it that much. At least it lived up to its title because this movie is the prime definition of carnage candy. This movie's memorable because of the kills and nothing else. The characters were just disposable dumb fucks, and most of them were just there to serve as body counts. The dialogue was hilariously over the top, and then it just ends abruptly. It doesn't even leave you on a satisfying note. This movie's good if you want to kill 90 minutes of your time, but for me it was just eh. In 8th place, Halloween Ends. I know it's kind of a hot take putting this movie this high, but I did enjoy it even if it's still a mess. For one, I do appreciate what they're trying to do here, something different with Corey, but at the same time, it's just baffling that they try to do it with the final movie of a trilogy. Not to mention there's a time jump from Kills to this, and 2/3 of this movie was basically useless when they try to build up Corey, only for Michael to return and kill him in the final act. So it's messy, such a strange film within this franchise, but I just find this the most rewatchable than the movies below this list. and the final showdown between Michael and Laurie, while not phenomenal, was at least satisfying enough. In 7th place, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. This has gotta be the biggest surprise that I've ever had with this franchise. I'm aware that the fandom's a bit mixed with this movie. Some fans found it a great continuation of the first and a raw, visceral representation of trauma and how that affects people, while others just flat out hate this movie exists, and hate the many things that Rob Zombie changed. I'm right there in the middle, totally understand the fans' praises and complaints of this movie. This is a more meaner and grimier film than the first, and it's totally not for everybody. And of course, Maskless Michael is in this film. The first 20 minutes was a shorter and far more brutal version of the original Halloween 2, but it doesn't even affect the movie since it's just a fucking dream, and Loomis is such an asshole here that I enjoyed him for being that. So there's aspects here that I liked and appreciated. It's an organic continuation and also a great exploration of the aftermath of Michael's terror in Haddonfield, and how the characters cope with that event. This version of Laurie isn't the one that we know and love, but for this version, her reaction to things fit well with the tone and setting that Rob Zombie's going for. There's also tons of great performances, and the kills are far more visceral and tense when you compare them to other entries of this franchise. Again, totally get if you don't like this movie, but this one's one of the more rewatchable entries for me. In 6th place, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Also one of the strangest films of this franchise, but also one of its disturbing and campier entries. The plot is absolutely ludicrous in all the best ways. It just feels so 80s and it's just a ton of fun. The paranoia aspects were also well done, and that ending was absolutely memorable. I guess this one just didn't click for me because of the lack of memorable characters and the slow first half. Still, I found this movie pretty watchable and one that might go higher up my list the more I watch it. In 5th place, Halloween H2O. This one moved down a bit on my list. Before it was in 3rd or 4th, but now it's in 5th. Now after rewatch, I kinda seen some of the flaws. In particular, I don't like the subplot about Laurie's son and classmates. I just don't care for them. And just the characters in general. I don't like the story that they went with here and the relationship. The mask also sucks, and there's like 3 or 4 versions of it here, and none of them looked amazing. And as much as I don't like to put Resurrection in my headcanon, the ending of this movie, while still satisfying, just leaves me on a bittersweet note. Resurrection just stinks so hard. But again, I still like the final act of this movie. The opening was also pretty memorable. There's not much kills in here, but when the body starts dropping, it's got that 90s horror scream vibes, and for some people, that didn't work, but for me, it was nice. And again, the final battle, quote-unquote, of Laurie and Michael was pretty good. My biggest advice for anyone who hasn't watched Resurrection and saw this film is to not watch it. You know, it's simple as that. Don't ruin your life, please, okay? Not unless you're working for a fucking video like me, so I guess watch Resurrection, but no, just don't, okay? In 4th place, Halloween 2. This one's interesting because on one side, you've got the fans who's kinda soft for this film, and on the other side, you've got the creators, and maybe some of the fandom, that think that this movie's garbage and a piece of shit. Personally, I'm part of the people who don't think that this is as good as the original, but as a continuation for that film, it works. Of course, the flaws are very noticeable, but the biggest of all of them was the twist, or at least in my opinion, it's the twist. It was terrible. I mean, even the way they delivered it, it just sounded like a throwaway dialogue. I was even confused when I first saw that scene. But let's be real here, that sibling twist, for all of its flaws, was maybe the biggest influence for the trajectory of where this franchise went with. Without that twist, we probably wouldn't have gotten the Thorn trilogy, and the H2O timeline, and all the other timelines and shits of this whole saga. It undeniably defined the franchise. But, you know, it still sucks though. Besides those, I still enjoyed this movie. It looks and feels like the original, and you can have a nice experience by watching the first and this back to back. The kills were more and brutal, a lot of them are memorable as well. So this movie's pretty thin on plot, but this movie's one of my picks if I'm in the mood for just carnage and kills. In 3rd place, Halloween 2018. The first movie of the Blumhouse trilogy, and its best as well. It's enjoyable from start to finish, a lot of neat kills and thrills here, and the final act was satisfying. It's also one of my favorite final acts in this franchise. I also liked the physical performance for Michael Myers here. He's menacing, and the mask absolutely sells it. But beyond that, without the sibling twists, Michael felt more terrifying since he's just pure evil in human form again. Killing random people in Haddonfield, and that's the version of Michael that I like. I thought it fumbles a bit with its attempt on humor. Character-wise, it was a bit mixed with how they handled Laurie here, and I wasn't really into the new cast of characters that they brought in. The middle portion dragged on a bit, but the final act was at least satisfying. So I had a good time with this one. The sequels kinda ruined my experience though with the direction that they took, but at the end of the day, it's still good Halloween. In second place, Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers. This one's a personal favorite since 1. This is the very first Halloween movie that I've seen, and I liked it even at the first time that I saw it, and 2. It's just a damn good Halloween movie. Not as strong as the original, but there's tons of aspects that I loved and enjoyed. It never drags on for way too long. From start to finish, it was engaging and entertaining. The characters, especially Jamie and Rachel, were incredible, and it's the reason why I hate Part 5 and 6 so much, because they disrespected those characters a lot. The atmosphere and vibe were perfect. This had a far better execution of the lynch mob angle that Kills tried to do but failed, and that ending was the biggest hook on why I watched the rest of the Thorn trilogy and the rest of the franchise. It's effective and it just works. Again, totally not perfect, but it's the more entertaining film in this franchise, and also my second most rewatched entry of the franchise. So for me, it deserves second place. But of course, in first place, Halloween. The John Carpenter classic, the horror movie that made me want to watch more horror movies, so it's one of my formative and favorite movies of all time. And there are tons of reasons why this film works on so many levels. It's a very simple premise, and on face value sounds so basic and boring, but John Carpenter and his crew managed to execute it beautifully. It doesn't have that much carnage candy when you compare it to other slashers, but again, it's fantastic because of its simplicity. Michael Myers wouldn't be this big of a horror icon without this film. The way he's shot, the way he looks, the way he stalks and kills his victims, and the way that he's simply pure evil. There's something eerie about that idea. But besides that, Michael's backstory just added more to that, and even the way Loomis describes him. Also, the great Donald Pleasence added a certain energy and gravitas to Dr. Loomis that even if he's not really a complex character, I mean he's just there for expositions and monologues, he's still highly memorable. Of course, Jamie Lee Curtis Laurie is also an iconic final girl. The theme by John Carpenter is also iconic. Again, everything here were very simple things that were executed phenomenally. So for me, Halloween deserves to be number 1, and it will never go down this spot. Not unless they make a kick-ass sequel, which I highly doubt.